Warm greetings. I am sorry I cannot be in person with you for the workshop in Vietnam, but it is a great pleasure to join you virtually. My name is James Cairns. I am the Senior Director for Strategic Engagements and Organizational Learning at the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. As you all dig into the topic of using evidence for programs and policies for early childhood in Vietnam, I have to say I'm honored to be invited to be part of this conversation with you and have had a great pleasure of following the development of the Early Journey of Life program from when it started as a pilot and through the Saving Brains program, and as it has scaled, as you have done evaluations to understand its impact and the opportunity now that it offers to improve lives of families and young children across Vietnam, in combination with many other things that are happening at the policy level and in programs and services among the collaborators and partners that are gathered for this workshop and in many other places in the country. What I've been asked to do today is to talk about where the science of child development is headed, and the work that our center does in that regard. So what we want to talk about is how to leverage this science as a set of tools to help you as you shape a new era in early childhood policy and practice. So our center, its core mission is to take a complex, multidisciplinary body of scientific knowledge and make that accessible for a broader public and for those who are responsible for shaping policies, programs, and services for kids and families in a variety of contexts around the world. So we're going deep into the complexity, looking at understanding, staying in touch with the emerging new knowledge that continues to come out of scientific research, and to tell then a story of what we know about how child development happens, what can put it at risk, and what we know about getting it on a good path. And so we think that we're at a moment where there's an opportune time for a mindset shift in how we think about science-informed policy and practice. This has been driven by two things. I think, as we all know, the last 3 or 4 years in our world have disrupted many things, have made more things visible to us about what affects kids and families. And we have new science. We have new information and a way to kind of tell a new story. And so 20 years ago, our center started to tell a story about the science of childhood development that was really focused on early brain development and how that happened and children developed in an environment of relationships. Those key concepts, which are just as true today, were things like brain architecture, how the brain is built over time, different skills, different connections, serve and return interaction, that relationship between caregivers and young children is the essential ingredient in building that brain architecture, and the story of stress and adversity and how toxic stress can damage brain development in different kinds of ways, and what we know about how we can support and prevent that. I think a lot of that story is one that you all know well, that has probably shaped the way you have thought about and designed the work that you do. And as I said, it's been 20 years since a lot of this has been out there and shared. And so there's always stuff happening, new information, new ways of understanding existing bodies of knowledge in their relationship to children and child development. And our early childhood ecosystem has continued to evolve over this time. And so we need to think about what comes next and what's more we need to add to the story of early brain development and relationships. And so we've coined this informally as ECD 2.0. Now, unlike in the tech world, 2.0 is not replacing 1.0. It's actually adding to it. And what we're adding is connecting what we know about brain development to what's happening in the rest of our body in a broader ecosystem that exists around that caregiver-child relationship. And so at its heart, this new story is about going deeper and going broader. And so let me start with what we mean about going deeper. So we've talked, as I said, about the effects of stress and adversity on the brain in a lot of ways for a long time, how we buffer that, how we respond to that. But really what we need to think about is its interactive development among multiple biological systems. And so when we look at this in the context of the stress response system, which we should be familiar with, there are stressors in our environments, and we have a stress response system that is designed to respond to that. The fight, flight, freeze, we know what this feels like. Our heart rate goes up, we get a little sweaty, shortness of breath, that we're prepared in a moment of acute awareness and potential threat to respond. And we know about the brain and what persistent stress and adversity can do in terms of brain architecture, stress hormones impacts on different parts of our brain. But the brain is actually connected to the rest of the body. And so all that science, that knowledge we've been talking about in terms of the effects of stress, aren't just happening in the brain. The brain is connected and managing a highly integrated set of other systems that you can think of as a team, each with its own distinctive skill, but working together, kind of like a volleyball team or a soccer team, to respond to threats. So we have the heart and cardiovascular system that is producing blood, which distributes oxygen and glucose, the fuel the body needs. The immune system, which is prepared to deal with infection or injury, often through inflammation. Our metabolic system that is turning food into the energy that then is getting distributed through the body. And our neuroendocrine system, which is producing and maintaining balances among different hormones, stress hormones and other kinds that are designed to be responsive to our environment. So again, this is all really important. In acute moments, we would not be here as a species if this system didn't work well. We all need it to cope with and build a healthy stress response system to be productive adults and be able to cope with our lives. The challenge is when this is elevated in a persistent, ongoing way, we've talked about toxic stress, the corrosive effect is happening in all of these systems. Think of it like a car engine that just is sort of revving all the time, and what that's doing to the different components of that car's system. So what does this look like? It looks like elevated metabolic levels in terms of glucose absorption, which can lead us to diabetes and other metabolic diseases. High blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, the stress and buildup in those systems. And particularly importantly, we're learning more and more about the role of persistent inflammation as part of the immune system as an important factor in higher risk and higher rates of things like heart disease, depression, forms of cancer, dementia. So what's happening early, these foundations that are getting set and this kind of ongoing corrosive effect over time is having impact in all of these systems in different kinds of ways. And so the key message here is that when we talk about supporting families and young children, it's just as important in terms of building a foundation for lifelong physical and mental health as it is about what we've talked for many years about early learning, social emotional development, school readiness. And so we need to understand as we take this next chapter, this new story, that it's this integrated set of systems that have both health and learning impact and outcomes. So that's the deeper part of the story. Let's talk about the broader part of the story. The environments in which children and families live. You might have seen our center released a working paper a couple of months ago entitled place matters. The environment we create shapes the foundations of healthy development. And this paper focuses on the built and natural environments in which families live, and how factors in those environments are shaping development and lifelong health. And also highlighting how historic and current policies and systems are creating variation and disparity in how those factors affect families. And this idea that where you live, the place where you live really matters. So let's walk through the key parts of this. First, we need to talk about the social environment. Many of the elements of the social environment are familiar in the story that we've been talking about for many years in terms of child development. That importance of responsive relationships, the impacts of the stress and adversity that surround families, making sure that there's caregiver well-being and community supports and connections. So that continues to be important as part of those environments around families. So, but this next ring is what this paper and what we're really trying to bring into this story right now. And this is not new research per se, but it's gathering bodies of knowledge and really looking at how those are impacting young children specifically. So these are things like air quality, temperature. We are learning more and more about how excessive heat affects development and sleep patterns and mental health issues and stress, access to clean water, to safe green space and playgrounds, and then built environment aspects like housing. Is it safe? Is it healthy? What's the neighborhood infrastructure look like? Is there access to nutritious food? Is there good transportation to allow for economic opportunity? Are there toxins in the soil or the air? All of these things are affecting children. And we have growing bodies of knowledge and evidence in each of these areas about what those effects are. So this interaction within the natural and built environment becomes a really important thing for us to understand and look at in terms of what's affecting child outcomes beyond just their access to programs and services. And then the final sort of part of this broader environment is to look at more systemic influences that are also having an impact on child health and development. They're kind of shaping those other environments. And this is where things like the current and historic policies that our societies have developed that often are shaping the structural inequities that might exist. In the United States, we're paying a lot of attention right now to systemic racism and how policies have shaped where people live, what they have access to in terms of health, education, and childcare, how those things contribute to cycles of poverty across generations. And so, again, the need to take these kinds of things into account. Let me give you an example of what this systemic level looks like from a United States perspective. So we need to talk about how these positive and negative influences in our environment are distributed, and they're not equal. And so here's a specific example, as I said, kind of the influence of historic and current policies in the United States that have shaped these systemic inequities over time. So this graph comes from something called the Child Opportunity Index. And a group in the United States has gone out and looked at the 100 largest metropolitan areas in the United States, and they have a 29-element scale that includes things like access to food, clean, good water, exposure to toxins and air pollution, access to high-quality childcare, heat and temperature exposure, kind of across that range of those different environmental factors that I talked about over the last couple of minutes. What this shows now is they've set the sort of national median score there at 50 out of a possible 100 on this opportunity index. And so as they ranked neighborhoods and looked at the predominant majority population by race and ethnicity of different groups in the United States, this is what was the result. And so what you see here is that for Black and Hispanic children, they are more than 7 to 5 times more likely to live in very low opportunity neighborhoods than white and Asian children. And so the segregation of these neighborhoods has been shaped very much by historic policies and practices in the US. And so it is contributing then to what we see in the disparity of outcomes in terms of child development and health. And this is at the neighborhood level, each of these little squares. So one example of a city in the Midwest of the United States. So a neighborhood that is predominantly white, ranked 85 out of 100. So it would put them very much to the right positive side of this scale. Another neighborhood in the same city that's 4 or 5 miles away, but is predominantly Black and African-American families, had a score of 6. So that's at the far left side of this. Same city, different neighborhoods, different racial and ethnic sort of distribution, vastly different opportunities for children. And so we just need to understand that this is a US example, right? In Vietnam, it will be a very different pattern of what kinds of inequities, what kinds of exclusion or inclusion are built in a way, into the history and the policies and the systems in your society that could reflect a similar kind of distribution of who's exposed to more of the negative environmental influences and who has access to more positive elements in those broader environments. So, where does this leave us? We think we are at a point where together we can envision a new and bold agenda in early childhood in a world that in various ways and in various places is still shaped by significant inequality, and as we've seen over the last several years, facing great uncertainty, whether from global pandemics or climate change or conflict or economic dislocation. What can we be saying? And how does this science and this new expanded story of what we're learning and what we know help us shape the policies and programs for children and families? So look, it's still about caregiver and child relationships. That has been and remains at the heart of what is essential for getting kids on a healthy developmental path. But look, it's also about how communities and business and government and other actors in our societies can work together to assure that there is a supportive and healthy environment for all families who are raising young children. And that we can't expect that those families can do this by themselves. That's not true here. It's certainly not true in Vietnam, and it's not true anywhere else around the world. And so this is where we have to go. And I hope that this expanding story of the science of child development can be helpful. There is plenty of information on our website, if you don't know it already. Working papers, infographics, videos, briefs. We encourage you to take advantage and use this material. And I hope that this has given you some new insight and inspiration. I wish you well in the rest of the workshop today. And more importantly, I wish you all great success in the ongoing work that you do on behalf of the children and families in Vietnam. Thank you again for the opportunity. And I wish you well and look forward to hearing how the work continues to go in Vietnam. Thank you very much.